Hello students, today we are going to discuss process of social research, components of social research and social survey aspects. Welcome to this new session on research. I am Dr. Ritvik Jagandhe. I belong to Department of Social Work, the Bhopal School of Social Sciences. So let us start with our discussion today. In social research, if you really see the steps in social research, multiple authors have given multiple steps. Some people talk about 5 steps, some people talk about 6 steps. Some other books you will see they will discuss about 10 to 12 steps. It is all subjective as per the preference of the author. But for the general purpose, people understand that these are the 11 steps which are considered to be the steps of social research. So, for example, you can understand these steps like this. First is selection of research problem. The very first thing in a social research is to identify the research problem. Which problem you are going to work on, which problem you are going to investigate. That is the first thing to identify. Second thing is review of related literature. Whatever problem you take for your research, the related literature needs to be identified and needs to be thoroughly investigated. Because until and unless we are aware of what other people have done in this particular area which we are going to explore, we can't really do a very serious work. Therefore, literature review becomes the second most important step. Third thing is formulation of research objectives. Now, research objectives first of all needs to be set out before beginning of the research study. So, that becomes the third process. Subsequently, it generates the research questions, which becomes the fourth step you can understand. Some people actually divide these steps as 2 separate steps, formulation of objectives and formulation of research questions. But some other scholars consider them as one single activity. No matter which way you go, the point is that identification of research objectives and identification of subsequent questions becomes the third step. Fourth important step is devising hypothesis. Now, hypotheses are assumptions, and what exactly is hypothesis that we will learn in the subsequent sessions. That is not the agenda of today's session, but hypothesis identification or hypothesis creation, formulation is a necessary step only if you are doing the kind of research it requires to do so. If you are not going for the quantitative research or similar kind of studies which actually require you to create a hypothetical framework, then it doesn't necessarily become the step of your study. Next one is making research design, that is creating a particular methodological setup. So, the next step would be to really show the methodology that you are going to follow. So, methodology becomes and making design of methodology becomes the next important step. Then sampling procedure, identifying the correct sampling procedure, that is next important step. And based on the sampling procedure, selection of data, collection of data, selection of data collection procedure and then collection of data, that becomes the next important step. After which hypothesis testing or the appropriate statistical procedure has to be followed, and then depending upon the statistical procedures, results are obtained and those results need to be interpreted in a thorough manner, and after the right interpretation of those results, you need to report those results in an appropriate format. All this becomes a part of the entire research process. But this is a theoretical way of understanding things. Now, the same thing has been understood by various means and ways. Actually, for our practical purpose, for our understanding, if we look at these things, then the process of social research that we should understand is somewhere like 6 phase or 6 stage social research process that you should understand. Now, if you see the particular slide which I am trying to show just now, you will find that there are 6 basic steps in the social research, and these 6 steps can be divided into 2 phases. So, first step will be consist of 3 steps, and second phase will consist of 3 stages. So, the first phase and first stage is identification of research problem and project formulation. The project formulation means you really lay out the entire plan of your research. What exactly will be your research questions, how exactly you are going to deal with them, what exactly would be your design of study, how exactly you are going to collect the data, how you will analyze that data collected, and how will you interpret those results, and how will you report those results. So, entire plan of your study is basically formulation of the research project, and along with the identification of the problem, how you are going to deal with the problem, that becomes the first stage, that you are just putting your research idea on paper. Second thing is review of literature. It means whatever problem you have propagated, alongside that problem, what all other studies exist, just having a review of those studies. Third stage is, according to the design and proposed method, collection of data. So, collection of data becomes this third important stage. So, this is the phase 1, right from the identification of problem to the collection of data. The second phase would be, after the data is collected, now the second phase starts, that is processing of data as per the proposed design. Whatever design you might have proposed, it might have been a pure survey based research, or it might be experiment, or it might have been proposed as a model building or model testing. So, whatever is the design, that we will come later on, that what is the designing part and all that, but whatever, irrespective of whatever design you have proposed, to really show your proposed plan and to really execute that plan, that becomes the first stage of the second phase. Then interpretation of results obtained, whatever analysis was to be done, after doing that, the interpretation of the results is a very important step. It is a very important stage also in the second phase, and based on the interpretation of the results, you really discuss the gist of your research, you really discuss the findings and major conclusions, and also you then report it to make it a public document. That is the last stage of your entire research process. So, in a nutshell, this is how the research process is known. Now, the second most important portion of this particular session is the discussion around components of social research process. What are the most important components of social research process? Now, please have a note that before really understanding a social research process, one really needs to understand things like data, variables, tools, methodology, design of study, hypothetical framework, interpretation and reporting, and model. So, these are some of the terms which I think you should really have a sound understanding of when you really want to understand the social research, because these are all the important components of social research. So, first is data. What is data? Information that is collected for the purpose of your investigation is known as data. So, any information which is collected, which you think is important to collect for your study, is basically data. Data can be qualitative as well as quantitative. Data can be primary data, secondary data. There are different types of data. So, primary data is one which you collect first hand, that is the first hand information which you collect and is being collected for the first time for the usage. So, that is primary data. Secondary data is an information which is coming to you through some source, because that source has already collected that particular information. So, that is secondary data. So, the newspaper articles, magazine articles, some other research databases, some data from here and there, different electronic databases, etc. That is some of the examples of secondary data. If you go to a particular village or a town or some other locality to collect data on a particular aspect, that is, you are collecting the information first hand. So that is an example of primary data. The second most important term of social research is variables. In fact, not only social research, but all the types of researches, you have to deal with variables. So ultimately, what is a variable? Now, variable is any measurable quantity which can assume many different values. It can be random, also at the same time it can be non-random. And there are different other kinds of variables, but variable is the most important term and most powerful term that every researcher applies and uses. There are different types of variables. For example, independent variable, dependent variable, mediating variable, moderating variable, extraneous variables, exogenous and endogenous variable, and so on. There are many other types exist, but these are some of the important ones which I just mentioned, which you should know. First is independent variable. So first of all, what is variable? Variable means any measurable quantity that you are going to adopt and use in your research. For example, if you ask a question, simple question in your questionnaire, what is your age? And you count the data and you take the data on the age of the people. So the age becomes variables. If you ask people their height, their weight, etc., then all these things can be termed as variables. So what is the independent variable? Independent variable is one which is independent in the research framework. The measure of, the effect of the independent variables has to be seen on all other variables. So that kind of measure is the independent variable. Dependent variable, however, is the one which is basically the ultimate point of study in your research. The dependent variable is one on which you see the effect of all other variables. So therefore it is called dependent variable because it depends on many other variables. Independent variable is one which does not depend on any other variable. So it is measured independently. So this is independent versus dependent variable. Next important thing is endogenous versus exogenous variables. Endogenous and exogenous variables are basically the two different kind of variables and they belong to the same continuum. That is, in the research framework, if certain variables are measured out of the research framework, but they are imposed upon the framework, then such variables are known as exogenous variables. And endogenous variables are the ones which are measured by the model itself which you have created during your research work. So endogenous variables are created ones which are created from the model itself, and exogenous variables are the outsider entries in the model. This is more used in econometrics and economics kind of research. The economists, they deal with more in case of these variables. Next important dichotomy is mediating and moderating variables. Now this is very important concept. These two variables are known as intermediary variables because they intervene between the independent and the dependent variables, or for example, for that matter, between any two variables. So these are the intermediary variables who intervene between the relationship of two different variables. So they can either be mediating or they can be termed as moderating. Mediating variable is one which mediates the relationship between variable x and variable y. Moderating variable is the one which moderates the relationship itself between x and y. Let me give you an example of mediating variable. Suppose there are two variables, study hours and percentage obtained in the exam. So study hours are predicting the percentage obtained in the exams. As you grow in terms of number of hours in your study, you are more likely to obtain higher percentage in the exam. So, the better the study hours or the more the study hours, more the percentage obtained. Can be a simplistic relationship between the two. Now, this is there is a positive association between these two variables, but there can be a mediating variable also. For example, study hours may not be directly affecting the percentage obtained in the exam. There may be a situation where if you increase the study hours, first the attention would increase or the growth in learning would happen. So, learning could be a mediating variable between the number of hours that you spent in study and the percentage that you obtain. So, between the number of hours in the study and the percentage obtained in the exam, there is a mediating variable which is called learning levels. So, first number of study hours has to translate into learning levels, then probably better learning would ensure that you actually have a better result. So, this is called mediation effect. So, learning levels are completely mediating or somewhere mediating between study hours and percentage obtained in the exam. So, let me give you an example of moderating variable. Moderating variable is again an intermediary variable, but which has a moderating effect on the existing relationship between a variable x and a variable y. For example, take variable x as a predicting variable. For example, distance between the two stations is a predicting variable, and it is predicting what? Say for example, it is predicting the price of a travel ticket, be it a air travel or a bus travel or whatsoever, price of a ticket. So, price of a ticket being a dependent variable is predicted by an independent variable, which is distance between the two stations or distance of the travel. So, the normal relationship is the larger the distance travelled, the higher the price. So, it is a normal positive association. You create a larger distance, you travel a larger distance, you have a higher price, you have to pay the higher price for that. So, this is a normal positive association. But there could be a variable, a moderating variable, which intervenes in this relationship and can be termed as a moderating variable, for example, which can be the season of the travel or the time of the travel. The different levels of time of the travel or the season of the travel can really disturb this relationship which exists between distance and the price of a travel ticket. For example, the same distance, in order to travel the same distance, the price that one is paying could be higher, lower, or in between or medium, depending on the season of the travel. Say for example, the rush is low rush, so the different levels of the moderating variable. Suppose rush is the moderating variable, depending upon the season of the travel, rush, low rush, medium rush and high rush. So, these three levels of moderating variable rush, there could be three different outcomes of the outcome variable, which is price. If there is low rush, even there is you have to travel the same distance, you have to pay a normal price. If there is a little bit medium rush, then probably you will have to pay a slightly more premium price. But if there is a high rush, it is a busy schedule, then probably high levels of the moderating variable would result into a high level of outcome variable, if the relationship is positively moderated by this moderating variable. So, this is an example of positive moderation, where the time of travel moderates the relationship between distance of travel and the price of the travel ticket. So, this is an example of a moderating variable. So, there are a number of other kinds of variables which can be understood as per the need and context of the study. Then the most important term of this particular social research or any research for that matter is tools. What are the tools in any research? The tools are questionnaires, schedules, or the formats that you actually prepare to collect the data. The data can be primary, secondary, but there are tools to actually capture the data. These days Not the paper pencil based surveys tools are actually in force, but mostly people go for the high tech ICT based surveys, for example Google survey form or GIS enabled survey through which is conducted through smartphone and with the help of some softwares. So tool can be anything, but tool can be electronic vis-a-vis non-electronic, but the basic idea is that any instrument that is used to collect data is known as tool. The next important term is methodology. Methodology of a research is basically that particular proposed way of going about the things. What is your approach, and based on that approach, what is the way that you propose to follow in order to really pursue the study that you are actually conducting. So that is methodology. It can be quantitative approach, it can be qualitative approach, it can be some other particular methodology within the qualitative or quantitative domain. So the approach and the ways and means that you adopt to really pursue your study, to really investigate further, is known as methodology. Design of study means the entire design or the construct of the particular study. It is a blueprint of your research. For example, if you construct a house, you really need a map. Where will be the bedroom, where will be the bathroom, which will be the location of the drawing room, etc. You need really a map, a blueprint which we call, in order to, and that same is replicated when you really construct the real life house. So in a similar fashion, for any research study also, you need to have first the blueprint of that research. That blueprint is known as the design of the study. How the study has been designed and how it has, and according to the design only it has to be executed. So you can say the design itself is a model and the real life execution of that model is the reality. So that is the design aspect of the study. The next important thing is, if the research is quantitative only, then you also have something called hypothetical framework. It means you really assume the relationship between the number of variables which you have taken in your designs. That, for example, X is connected to Y, X is positively associated to Y, then Y is associated negatively to Z, Z is again positively associated to A, B, C, things like that. So whatever is hypothetical, it is hypothetical. It means it is not, you don't really know about the truth, you don't really know about the reality, it's just a hypothetical framework. You are assuming it, that this is the assumed relationship between the variables. So that entire framework, some studies are fairly simple, there you can easily show that okay, these are the three relationships that I assume, but some of the models, some of the constructs can be really complicated ones. There you really assume a lot of complicated relationship between and interlinkages between the variables. So that is known as the hypothetical framework. And the next important thing is interpretation of these particular results. So after the collection of data, you have to design which way you are going to analyze these things, and based on your analysis, what interpretation needs to be drawn, that is the thing which requires a fairly detailed statistical understanding and knowledge. So that is the interpretation part of it. And the next term is model. Model is really very research related term. Again, model, what is model? Model is basically a replica that you create of the reality. So most of the research studies actually claim that they are really close to the reality. It means the construct that they have designed, or the hypothetical framework, or the model that they have built is basically closer to the real life situations. How close it is, that is a subject to test, that is a matter of which will be tested through statistical procedures, through the inferential statistics. But ultimately they propose a model and they claim that it is close to the reality, or actually the reality is like, because nobody knows the reality. A researcher essentially believes that reality is not known. So it is a pursuit of the reality only, the truth. So what is the truth like? You propose a model and then you test it whether it is really the same way or not. So this model building is also a very important exercise in the research. Now the third and final part of this particular session is a brief discussion on social survey and social welfare survey. Well, social welfare survey is a part of social survey. Social survey is a broad term whereby survey is connected to all the social investigations. Social welfare survey is a subset of social survey whereby the survey's intention and the purpose is limited to the welfare of the certain sections of society or the society in general. But before we really go into the social welfare survey and survey, let us try to find out what the survey is all about, social survey is all about. Now, basically social survey is the exercise of collecting the information from the selected sections of society, and these selected sections are very much defined as per the design of the study and the objectives of the research. And there is a scientific way of selecting these sections or units from which we really gather the information during our survey, and that procedure of identifying these units is known as sampling procedure. So, which is again a scientific procedure. About the sampling procedure, probably we would have another session, but then there is a scientific way of identifying these units or subjects which we really want to gather information from, and these key informants or these key units which are subject of study, they are selected very scientifically. But once they are selected, we really go out and seek the information from them which is the subject matter of our interest, in tune with our social research objectives, and that entire procedure is known as social survey. So, as per the definition suggests, survey research may be defined as a technique whereby the researcher studies the whole population with respect to certain sociological and psychological, or for that matter in general, social variables. So, if the researcher wants to study the factors affecting interest of the students in mathematics, so whatever tools he is going to use, schedule, questionnaire, etc., will be the tools for that particular survey. Every survey exercise will always have certain tools, whether it can be questionnaire or schedule or any semi-structured questionnaire or semi-structured schedule, etc. And these days there are various electronic tools also available. Even the recordings are used as a tool for the data collection, this electronic recording. So, this is the social survey. There are certain other steps which are very important to know. Though these steps are: first, enunciating the object or purpose of the survey, what is the objective of survey. Second, definition of the problem under study. You need to really define, you need to really know what exactly is the problem that you are studying before you really start the survey. Because in survey you are measuring, you are collecting information on certain variables. So, and those variables are carefully selected only after you know your problem very well. So, therefore, the definition of problem is very important before you really design the instrument for the survey. Third is delimitation of the area or the scope of the study, because survey can be physical or can be non-physical also. Sometimes electronically you reach out to people, but you reach out to people, you really need to know to whom you really need to reach out. So, therefore, that becomes the third most important stage. Fourth is examination of the available evidences or sources relating to the problem. It is also a parallel exercise along with the empirical data collection in a social survey. Next is preparation of the various tools, and the next one is according to those tools, you really go out in the field and you gather the information. So, this is precisely the entire procedure, or you can say steps for a social survey. Lastly, one more thing is there, but some scholars believe that this is not exactly the part of social survey procedure, but this is kept as a part of the analysis procedure, which is the next step of after the data collection. That is tabulation, classification, coding, and some making that raw information capable of going through certain statistical procedures and tests. or some kind of analysis which you have thought of as a researcher. So basically when you collect the information from any source, primary, secondary, etc., you need to really work on that information. So that procedure is known as classification of information, tabulation, coding, etc. You need to really arrange that information in a coherent and sensible manner by doing these things, tabulation and so on, coding, etc. Once you do that, then only this information actually becomes processable. So some people believe it a part of a social survey, some people believe it as part of the analysis. Nonetheless, it is important for us to know that this is an important step. Now, this is about the social survey. So in this session, we quickly learned about three things, which is first is the entire process of the social research. The second thing is the important components of a social research, variables, etc., and important approaches at the same time. And we finally concluded our discussion on the social survey part and the social welfare survey part. Now, social welfare survey, as I told you, is limited to when the objective of the survey is limited to social welfare or the welfare of certain sections of society or the entire society. Now, let me tell you briefly, which is also important, which is not very related to this particular exercise, this particular session, but then it's very useful information for all of you, is that there are agencies, government agencies in India who do the social survey. And for your information, you must know these agencies which are mentioned on this slide for you. I will read out some of the names for you also. Survey of India is a Government of India agency. Then Archaeological Survey of India, National Family Health Survey is an example of social welfare survey agency. Central Statistical Organization, National Sample Survey Organization, NSSO. So these are some of the important agencies. And lastly, there is a format of the reporting of your social research, and the most common format. Now there can be an n number of formats, but this is precisely the most widely accepted one, which I am showing you just now, which is here. The first portion is preliminary pages, that is your title page, abstract, table of contents, etc. It can be many more other things as per the institutional requirements. Second thing is main body of your research, that is introduction, literature review, design of research, methodology, data analysis, interpretation, findings, suggestions, etc. Your main work. And the third one is your references, the sources that you have referred for conducting this particular social research or any research. So students, I hope that you must have gained some knowledge through this session. Thank you very much.